On a cold October morning in Chicago, the living room was silent as Emily carefully packed her bag for college. Her phone vibrated on the kitchen table, where her mother, Donna, sat quietly with a cup of coffee in her hands, watching her intently. "Emily," Donna called out in a firm tone that made her daughter instinctively stop what she was doing. "Sit down. We need to talk." Emily hesitated, sensing that this phrase always preceded something difficult. Slowly, she sat down, looking at her mother with a mix of confusion and attentiveness. "I know you're almost done with your psychology degree," Donna began, her gaze fixed, as though searching for some understanding in her daughter's face. "But right now, we're in a complicated situation." Emily frowned. "Complicated? What do you mean by that?" Donna took a deep breath, setting her coffee cup aside. "You know the bills are piling up. The mortgage on the house, the car loan. I can't keep it up on my own anymore, and your college. Well, those are expenses I can't cover alone." Emily's heart raced, a mix of confusion and fear spreading through her. "And what are you asking me to do, Mom? I'm studying to get a good job, and—" Donna cut her off with an impatient gesture. "Life isn't always that simple, Emily. You know our neighbor, Mr. Montgomery? He's a very well-established man in finance, respected, stable, and his son, Tyler, has a promising future." Emily backed away in her chair, her eyes wide. "Mom, what are you getting at? Tyler Montgomery and I have nothing in common. Besides, he's insufferable." Donna, however, remained unmoved. "Listen, Emily, I'm not asking you to like him. I'm asking you to consider what's best for all of us." The tension in the room grew thick, and Emily's mind filled with a dense, suffocating fog. "Best for us," she repeated, her voice shaky. "Are you asking me to consider a marriage of convenience?" Donna straightened her shoulders, her expression stern. "I'm asking you to be practical. This is an opportunity that can save this house, your education, and give us the security we never had." Emily was speechless, rage welling up inside her, struggling against the initial shock. She tried to respond, but her mother was faster. "I want you to go to the Montgomery's house this Saturday," Donna said, standing up. "Tyler will be there." On Saturday night, the imposing facade of the Montgomery mansion looked even more intimidating under the golden garden lights, casting long shadows across the old brick walls. Emily stayed inside her car for a few seconds, taking a deep breath. She looked toward the entrance and saw Tyler's silhouette standing there, waiting for her. He wore an arrogant smile, as if he already owned the situation. She closed her eyes, trying to control the mix of anger and nervousness threatening to overwhelm her. "It's just dinner, Emily. Then you can leave," she whispered to herself before opening the car door and stepping out. As she approached, Tyler greeted her with an assessing look that made her skin crawl with discomfort. "Emily, glad you came," he said with a calculated smile, extending his hand. "I hope you're comfortable. My father made sure everything was arranged." "I'm fine," she replied, avoiding his gaze. Tyler led her inside the mansion, which felt more like a palace than a home. Marble floors, paintings on the walls, and golden details on the furniture. Every detail screamed wealth and ostentation. Emily felt out of place in the dress Donna insisted she wear, even though it wasn't her style. She would have preferred something simpler, but she was there to please. Tyler's father, Richard Montgomery, was waiting in the dining room, his serious expression softening slightly when he saw her. "Miss Emily," he greeted her with a firm handshake. "It's a pleasure to finally have you with us. I've heard much about you." Emily's heart pounded as she tried to ignore the feeling of being judged every second. "Thank you for the invitation, Mr. Montgomery," she replied, giving a small nod as she took her seat. Throughout dinner, the conversation revolved around Tyler and his work in his father's company, with Richard visibly proud of his son while Emily just nodded politely. Tyler seemed radiant, describing each professional success with enthusiasm, as if he was trying to impress her at any cost. "And you, Emily?" Richard turned to her, his voice amiable. "You're studying psychology, right?" She nodded hesitantly. "Yes, it's something I've always wanted to do. I'm very interested in understanding people, relationships," she said, glancing briefly at Tyler, who was watching her with a mocking smile. "Psychology, huh?" Tyler chuckled, shaking his head. "I always thought it was kind of, how can I put it? Subjective. Do you really think understanding people helps with anything?" The question caught her off guard. She looked at Tyler, feeling challenged. "I think understanding others is essential in any field, Tyler. People are complex, and understanding their emotions makes a big difference, even in the business world." Richard gave a quiet laugh, seemingly approving of her response. Tyler, however, only raised his eyebrows, slightly irritated by her retort. Dinner continued, filled with subtle exchanges of barbs between them, always disguised under polite smiles and courteous conversation. When they finally reached dessert, Richard stood up, picking up a glass of wine and lightly tapping its rim to draw everyone's attention. "Emily, I'd like to toast to your presence," he said, looking at her with a smile that seemed more like a stamp of approval than anything else. "I hope tonight is the beginning of a very prosperous friendship between our families." Emily raised her glass, still unsure of how to feel about it all. As she drank, she noticed Tyler giving her an intense, almost challenging look, as if he wanted to see if she could handle what was coming. After dinner, when they were alone in the hallway, Tyler broke the silence. "You know, Emily, I must admit I was surprised you came. I didn't think this was your kind of evening." She looked at him, taking a deep breath. "It isn't, in fact. But it seems you attract these kinds of situations, Tyler." He gave a short laugh, crossing his arms as he observed her with interest. "Then why did you come?" Emily stared at him for a few seconds, determined not to lower her guard. "Sometimes we have to make hard choices, Tyler. And other times, those choices are made for us." His smile faded for a moment, and a flash of something almost genuine crossed his face. "I didn't choose much either," he muttered, almost as if confiding in her, before shaking his head and returning to his usual arrogant demeanor. "But that's fine, Emily. I'm sure we can come to an understanding." She didn't reply. Without another word, she turned and left the mansion, feeling a heavy weight on her shoulders. She knew this was only the beginning. Monday arrived quickly, and the weight on Emily's shoulders only seemed to grow. The dinner conversation and Tyler's sudden change of tone at the end of the night still echoed in her mind. As she drove to college, she felt her phone vibrating in her pocket, but she ignored the messages, knowing they were from her mother. Donna had been insistent since the dinner, her excitement growing, as though this secure future was already a done deal. When she finally reached campus, Emily threw herself into her study group, determined to push Tyler and her mother's plan out of her mind. But during class, her phone vibrated once more. She discreetly checked it, expecting more texts from Donna, only to see an unfamiliar number. A knot of unease settled in her stomach. She silenced the phone and continued with her class, but curiosity gnawed at her. When the class ended, and still clutching her books, she decided to check the messages. "Good morning, Emily. This is Tyler Montgomery. I think we still need to talk." She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. This wasn't going to end any time soon. Back in her routine, Emily ignored the messages, trying to keep herself busy until later that evening, when she finally returned home, only to be met by Donna, waiting eagerly in the living room with a broad smile on her face. "Did you talk to Tyler again, honey?" Emily sighed, slipping off her coat and giving her mother an exasperated look. "He texted me, that's all. And honestly, Mom, I have no interest in taking this any further. I think I've made that clear." Donna moved closer, her expression more serious. "Emily, I know this might be hard for you to accept, but I need you to look beyond your personal wants. I raised you on my own, made sacrifices, and now it's your turn to do something for us. I can't keep holding this family up alone." Emily felt her cheeks flush, her eyes stinging with indignation and, at the same time, guilt. "And you think that justifies selling my future?" "Selling your future?" Donna asked, clearly irritated. "I'm trying to make sure you have one. This kind of chance doesn't come around twice, and Tyler is a man who can offer stability." Emily let out a bitter laugh, her voice trembling with frustration. "Stability? He's selfish, arrogant, and only wants someone by his side as a trophy. He doesn't care about anything but himself." Donna crossed her arms, her expression unyielding. "This isn't a fairy tale, Emily. Real life doesn't work like that. In real life, security is what matters, not some independence dream you think you have." Emily knew arguing was pointless. Without another word, she turned and went up the stairs toward her room, feeling more and more suffocated in a house that no longer felt like hers. Once in her room, memories of the dinner and Tyler's behavior lingered. His hesitance and that offhand confession about how he, too, didn't choose much echoed in her head. It was difficult to believe, but there had been a brief vulnerability in his voice. The next morning, after a sleepless night, Emily decided to confront things the only way she knew how. She sent Tyler a short message, arranging to meet him in a quiet cafe downtown. Hours later, Tyler arrived on time, wearing a guarded expression. "I didn't expect you to reach out," he said as she gestured for him to sit. Emily met his gaze, her voice steady and unflinching. "We need to set some things straight, Tyler. I'm not a piece in your game. If you and your father have some kind of plan around this, it's best to tell me now." He smirked, but his eyes held no amusement. "You're seeing this way too simply. The truth is, this arrangement could benefit both families. We're both young, educated, and decent-looking. Why not move forward?" "Maybe because I don't want this," Emily replied with clear frustration. Tyler ran a hand through his hair, leaning back, his face softening as his tone shifted. "Listen, I'll be honest. If you think you can just walk away from this because you want to, you're mistaken. My father's a powerful man, Emily. He doesn't choose to lose." She stared at him, caught between wondering if this was a warning or a threat. "Is that supposed to scare me, Tyler? I'm just saying it won't be easy to escape this situation. And I'll admit something else," he said, lowering his voice. "I don't want this either. But, just like you, I don't have a choice." Emily looked at him, astonished. It was as if she was seeing another side of Tyler, a side both vulnerable and trapped. "So, you're being forced into this too," she whispered. He simply nodded, his gaze distant. "My parents have plans, and all I can do is follow them." "But let me make one thing clear, Emily," he said, his tone becoming more intense. "We can at least try to make this work on our terms." She exhaled, her mind racing with conflicting thoughts and emotions. "And what do you suggest then?" she asked, almost reluctantly. Tyler looked at her with a slight smile, as if he had expected that question. "Let's set our own rules." In the days following the agreement, Emily found herself in an odd, intense state of mind. Everything felt surreal, as if she were living in an alternate reality where feelings were less important than appearances. In a way, that helped her accept what was coming. Tyler and she, theoretically, had a defined plan. But in practice, the weight of the facade and the pressure from both families haunted her daily. Then, one morning, Tyler messaged her, asking to meet at a quiet cafe downtown. "Is something wrong?" she asked when he arrived, noticing his tense expression. Tyler sighed, running a hand through his hair as he leaned back in his chair with a worried look. "My dad wants me to start working in the finance division of the company as soon as we return from the honeymoon," he explained, visibly uncomfortable. "He's pressuring me to take on more responsibility, and because of that, he wants me to move to New York right after the wedding." Emily was silent for a moment, trying to process what he was saying. She knew Tyler had always been reluctant to involve himself in his father's company, and the idea of assuming a major role in New York was clearly something he didn't want. "And are you going to go along with it?" she asked cautiously. He shook his head, his eyes distant. "Do I really have a choice? I'd prefer to keep things as they are, but my father's making it clear that it's non-negotiable. And now, with the marriage, I feel like he sees me as an extension of his own ambitions." Emily felt a pang of empathy. She knew what it was like to be seen as merely a piece in someone else's grand plan. Since the engagement, her mother had constantly reminded her that this marriage was the opportunity of a lifetime, and that she should make the most of it. "It's like they don't even see us, Tyler," she murmured, staring at the coffee cup in her hands. "They just see what we can do for them. Nothing else." Tyler sighed in agreement. "Exactly." He watched her for a moment, and the hardness in his face softened slightly. "Listen, Emily. Before all this starts to completely consume us, I was thinking of—" He stopped, hesitant. "Thinking of what?" Emily prompted, intrigued by his sudden hesitation. "Of running away. Just for a few days," he admitted, his voice low. "Before the wedding, we take a short break, far away from everything. Just to remember what it's like to live without all this pressure, even if it's only for a while." Emily blinked, surprised. The idea sounded absurd, irresponsible, but a small spark of excitement flickered within her. And then, before she could talk herself out of it, she nodded. "Where to?" she asked, trying to hide her smile. "I thought of a cabin I know up north in Michigan," Tyler replied, giving her a slight grin. "It's isolated, peaceful. No expectations, no rules, just peace." 2 nights later, Emily found herself on the road with Tyler, heading to the cabin. The silence between them was comfortable, a rare feeling. Neither tried to keep up appearances or force conversations about the wedding. This trip was a small refuge amid the chaos that both were facing. The road was long, and as they entered the forest, the night seemed to envelope the car in an almost supernatural quietness. Finally, after several hours, they arrived at a small cabin by a lake, surrounded by dense pine and oak trees. "It's nice," Emily murmured as she got out of the car, looking around. The cabin was simple but cozy, with a porch that looked out over the lake and the starlit sky. Tyler opened the door and gestured for her to come inside, offering a rare, genuine smile. "It's no palace, but it's far from everything," which was the point. As they entered, Emily noticed that the interior was rustic but well kept, with wooden furniture and a fireplace that made the space feel warm. She walked through the living room, touching the furniture and, for the first time in weeks, feeling something close to peace. "I didn't know you had this outdoors side," she commented, giving him a light smile as he lit some lamps and started the fireplace. Tyler shrugged. "There's more to me than arrogance and business, you know? I grew up coming here with my mom." He stopped, suddenly uncertain, as if he'd revealed too much. Emily noticed his hesitation and felt a sudden urge to know more about this side of Tyler. "And why didn't you ever tell me about it before?" He looked away, seeming thoughtful. "I guess, because I never needed to. For my father, this place means nothing. But for me, it was the only place where his demands couldn't reach me." Tyler looked at her, his face softened by an expression Emily had never seen before. "Maybe now, we can share this place. A part of me my father never understood." Emily nodded, absorbing his words. She realized that, like her, Tyler was also burdened by invisible expectations and obligations that seemed unbearable. That night, as the fireplace crackled and the cold outside began to intensify, Tyler and Emily talked for hours, sharing stories and memories they had never revealed. He told her about how he hated the path his father was forcing him to take and about his real desire to work on social projects, an idea that seemed ridiculous for a Montgomery heir. Emily, in turn, opened up about how trapped she felt, a pawn in her mother's social climbing dreams. It was the first time she admitted out loud the fear she had of losing everything important to her. "Sometimes, it feels like no matter what we do, we'll never be free, right?" Emily whispered, her eyes fixed on the flames in the fireplace. Tyler nodded, staring into the fire with the same melancholy expression. But at least, here, we have a bit of freedom. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough for now. The night passed slowly, wrapped in the comforting silence of the cabin and the unexpected connection they were discovering. For the first time, they felt they'd found an ally amid the chaos of their lives, a fragile trust forming between them. And in that quiet early morning, as the fire crackled and the sound of trees swaying outside lulled them, Emily knew that, no matter how difficult the road ahead might be, she wouldn't face it alone. The weeks following their escape to the cabin flew by in a blur. Emily and Tyler returned to Chicago with a silent understanding between them, a newfound closeness that made the weight of their arrangement easier to bear. Tyler fulfilled his role as the attentive fiancé, and, for the most part, Emily managed to keep up the facade without resentment. But despite the seemingly smooth surface, she could feel that the real test of their agreement was looming on the horizon. Their official engagement party, arranged by Tyler's father at an exclusive club in Chicago. On the night of the event, Emily looked at herself in the mirror, a mixture of dread and disbelief filling her as she took in her appearance. She wore an elegant navy blue dress that her mother had painstakingly picked out, with a soft neckline and a high slit that revealed her legs discreetly. Though the dress was stunning, Emily felt like a stranger in it. "You look beautiful, Emily." Donna appeared in the doorway, her eyes misty with emotion as she watched her daughter put on the final touches. It's every mother's dream to see her daughter on a night like this. Emily held back a sigh, sensing that this night wasn't really about her. Donna was already imagining the social climb, picturing the stability and respect that would follow the union of the two families. "Thank you, Mom," Emily replied, keeping her tone neutral. Donna stepped closer, fussing over a stray lock of Emily's hair. "It's normal to feel nervous. But believe me, after tonight, you'll see that all of this is for your own good." Emily forced a smile, but the words felt hollow, like a promise she wasn't sure she wanted to keep. Everything seemed too polished, too planned, as if her life were one big performance meant to please others, not herself. An hour later, Emily and Donna arrived at the club, which had been transformed for the evening. Fresh flowers adorned every table, a string quartet played soft music, and delicate lights hung from the ceiling, casting a sophisticated glow over the room. Tyler was waiting for them at the entrance, dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, his expression calm and controlled. When he saw her, a flicker of surprise and perhaps admiration crossed his face. He greeted her with a light kiss on the cheek, keeping up their carefully constructed act. "You look absolutely stunning, Emily," he said, offering his arm as they moved through the crowded room. "This is their night, after all, so let's make it as painless as possible." She nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle over her. As they moved through the room, Emily noticed the approving glances and whispers of admiration that followed them. The atmosphere grew heavier as they reached the crowd surrounding Richard Montgomery, who was beaming with pride. "Tyler! Emily!" Richard exclaimed, his smile wide and confident as he pulled the two of them into the circle of family friends and business associates. "You both look radiant. I think this will be a night Chicago won't soon forget." Emily forced a smile as Richard shook her hand firmly, holding on just long enough to remind her of his approval, or perhaps of his control. "Thank you, Mr. Montgomery," she replied with a polite nod. But inside, she felt like she was drowning under the pressure to smile and play her part. When they finally broke away from the group, Tyler leaned close to her, his tone low. "You're handling this well, you know? I think we've fooled them all." She let out a breath, exhausted. "For now," she murmured. "We'll see how long it lasts." He chuckled lightly, but she could see the tension in his eyes. Before he could respond, Richard climbed onto a small stage and tapped his glass, calling the room's attention. "Friends, family, and partners, tonight is a very special night," he began, his deep voice carrying easily over the crowd. "We aren't just celebrating the union of two families. We're also witnessing the start of a partnership that will bring stability and strength to all of us." Emily's stomach twisted at Richard's words, his tone more fitting for a business deal than a marriage. She glanced at Tyler, who stood rigid beside her, his face set in a polite mask. Tyler and Emily are a couple who represent the solidity and commitment our family has always sought, Richard continued, oblivious to the tension on their faces. And I am confident they will make us all proud with their efforts and success. The room erupted in applause, and Emily nodded politely, keeping her gaze down to avoid meeting anyone's eyes. As Richard stepped down, the crowd closed in, asking questions about the wedding, their future plans, and the highly anticipated ceremony. Tyler and Emily responded carefully, keeping their answers vague but enough to satisfy everyone's curiosity. After a while, Emily felt like she couldn't take it anymore. She excused herself, slipping out onto the balcony to catch her breath. The cold night air felt like a balm, and she closed her eyes, inhaling deeply to calm the tightness in her chest. It wasn't long before Tyler joined her, quietly closing the glass door behind him as he came to stand beside her. "I thought you might need a break," he commented, leaning against the railing next to her. "I'm about to lose it, Tyler," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can keep going through with this. It feels like I'm selling my soul." He watched her for a moment, his gaze softened by an understanding she hadn't expected. "I know. It feels horrible right now, but maybe over time, this will just become part of our lives." She laughed bitterly, unconvinced. "And what if it doesn't? What if this agreement destroys us?" Tyler sighed, crossing his arms and staring down at the city lights below. "Then, maybe we'll have to find a way to make it worth something. I know we're not friends, but maybe we can at least support each other. Just for as long as we need to." She looked at him, surprised by the honesty in his voice. "And how exactly do you think we can support each other, Tyler?" she asked, more serious than she intended. He shrugged, but his gaze was sincere. "We start slow. You can trust me, and I'll trust you. It doesn't matter what everyone else thinks or what our parents expect. The agreement is between us, Emily. And maybe, just maybe, that can be enough." She didn't respond right away, letting his words echo in her mind. Deep down, she knew that maybe it could work, at least for a while. She looked at Tyler, who waited patiently, his expression softer than ever. Finally, she nodded slowly. "All right, Tyler. Let's do this your way." She extended her hand with a surprising determination. "Let's make it just an agreement." Tyler took her hand, his grip firm, and a glimmer of relief and understanding shone in his eyes. "An agreement, then." The engagement party was behind them, but the pressure didn't ease. The following weeks were filled with endless preparations for the wedding, formal dinners, and supplier meetings. Everywhere they went, Emily and Tyler were the picture of a happy, promising couple. To Emily's surprise, Tyler went out of his way to make the situation bearable for her, surprising her with his patience and even, at times, his kindness. But the stress of the upcoming wedding and her doubts about the future gnawed at her constantly. One morning, Emily received a message from Tyler, asking her to meet him at a quiet cafe in the city. "Is something wrong?" she asked, noticing his tense face as he sat down. Tyler sighed, rubbing his forehead and leaning back in the chair, his gaze far away. "My dad wants me to take over the finance division of the company as soon as we're back from the honeymoon," he said, sounding almost defeated. "He's pushing me to take on more responsibility, and he wants me to move to New York right after the wedding." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She knew how much Tyler resented being pressured into joining his father's company, and a transfer to New York was far more commitment than she expected. "Are you going to go along with it?" she asked carefully. He looked at her, almost helpless. "Do I have a choice? My father made it clear this isn't optional. And now, with the wedding, he sees me even more as an extension of his own plans." Emily felt a heavy sadness settle over her. She, too, was feeling crushed under the weight of other people's expectations, with Donna constantly reminding her of the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity this marriage represented. "It's like they don't even see us, Tyler," she murmured, staring down at her coffee cup. "They only see what we can do for them." He nodded, his expression equally bitter. "Exactly." Tyler looked at her, his face softening for a moment. "Listen, Emily. Before this all takes over, I was thinking." "Thinking what?" she asked, curious. "About running away. Just for a few days," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Before the wedding, let's take a break. Somewhere away from all of this. No pressures, no expectations. Just a few days to remember what it's like to live without all this weight." Emily blinked, taken aback. The idea sounded reckless, even irresponsible, but she felt a surge of excitement rise within her. Without thinking, she nodded. "Where would we go?" she asked, trying to hide her smile. "I know a cabin up north in Michigan," Tyler replied, giving her a small grin. "It's quiet, secluded. No one around, just peace." 2 nights later, Emily found herself in the passenger seat of Tyler's car as they drove north. The quiet between them was surprisingly comfortable. There were no rehearsed lines, no talk of wedding plans. It was a small escape, a taste of freedom neither of them had had in a long time. The road stretched on, and as they drove deeper into the woods, the night seemed to close in around them, a blanket of quiet and darkness. After hours of driving, they finally arrived at a small cabin nestled beside a lake, surrounded by dense pine trees and towering oaks. "It's beautiful," Emily murmured as she stepped out of the car, taking in the peaceful surroundings. The cabin was simple but charming, with a porch that overlooked the lake, sparkling under the starlit sky. Tyler opened the door and motioned for her to go in, giving her a rare, genuine smile. "It's not much, but it's far away from everything," which was the goal. As they stepped inside, Emily took in the cozy, rustic interior. Wooden furniture filled the space, and a stone fireplace sat in the center of the living room, adding a warmth to the room that was both inviting and calming. She walked around, taking in the space, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't felt in months. "I didn't know you had this outdoors side," she teased, smiling as he lit a few lamps and started a fire in the fireplace. Tyler shrugged. "There's more to me than business and arrogance, you know? I used to come here with my mom when I was younger." He stopped, his face suddenly clouded, as if he'd revealed more than he intended. Emily noticed his hesitation and felt a sudden curiosity about this side of him. "Why didn't you tell me about this place before?" He looked away, thoughtful. "Because I didn't think it mattered. My father never cared about this place. But for me, it was the only place where I could escape him." Tyler looked at her with an openness she hadn't seen before. "Maybe it's time I shared it with someone who understands that feeling." Emily nodded, absorbing his words. She realized that, like her, Tyler was carrying a heavy burden of family expectations and demands he couldn't ignore. That night, as the fire crackled and the cold outside grew sharper, Tyler and Emily talked for hours. They shared stories they'd never told anyone, parts of their lives they had kept hidden. He opened up about his resentment toward the path his father had mapped out for him and about his long-standing dream to work in social projects, a vision his father found absurd. In turn, Emily shared her frustrations about being trapped in her mother's social ambitions. For the first time, she spoke openly about her fear of losing herself to obligations she'd never chosen. "Sometimes, it feels like we'll never be free, no matter what we do," Emily whispered, watching the fire flicker and dance. Tyler nodded, his gaze distant. "But at least right here, we have a bit of freedom. And maybe that's enough for now." The night passed slowly, wrapped in the silence of the cabin and a new understanding between them. For the first time, they felt they had found an ally in the chaos of their lives, a fragile trust growing between them. And that quiet, peaceful dawn, as the fire's glow faded and the trees swayed gently outside, Emily knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she wouldn't face them alone. Returning to Chicago after their escape to the cabin, Emily and Tyler shared a new understanding. The silent bond between them was unmistakable, an unspoken agreement that allowed them to handle the weight of their arrangement more easily. Still, the days leading up to the wedding felt like a storm gathering on the horizon. Donna, overjoyed by the progress, took it upon herself to manage every detail of the wedding preparations. Tyler also fulfilled his role as the dedicated fiancé, playing his part to perfection. One evening, a few days before the wedding, Donna invited Tyler over for dinner. She insisted that it would be a small family gathering, but Emily knew her mother too well. Donna had likely arranged something more complicated than a simple family meal. When they finished dinner, Donna excused herself to retrieve something from the kitchen, leaving Emily and Tyler alone in the living room. "This dinner seems to have a second purpose," Tyler murmured with a slight smile, glancing around. Emily chuckled, shaking her head. "You don't know my mother like I do. If she's planning something, we'll find out soon enough." Donna soon returned with a small envelope in her hands and a serious expression on her face. Tyler and Emily exchanged a glance, both curious. "I wanted to share something with you both before the wedding," Donna began, sounding almost nervous. "It's a letter from your father, Emily." Emily froze. Her father had left the family when she was just a child, cutting off contact for reasons Donna never fully explained. For years, her mother had refused to talk about him, claiming it was better not to reopen old wounds. "A letter," Emily whispered, her voice wavering. "And why now?" Donna averted her gaze, clutching the envelope close to her chest. "He sent this years ago, but I thought it was best to keep it from you," she admitted, her voice filled with regret. "I believed it was the right decision, but now, with your wedding approaching, it seems only fair that you read it." She placed the envelope on the table, her expression pleading. In silence, Emily picked it up, her heart pounding as memories of her father flooded back. She carefully opened the envelope, pulling out a worn letter in familiar handwriting. Taking a deep breath, she began to read. "My dear Emily, if you're reading this, it's because your mother finally thought it was time to tell you the truth. I know I have no excuse for leaving, but I need you to understand that I never wanted to abandon you. I have loved you from the first moment, and despite the years that have passed, that love hasn't lessened. My absence was a decision made out of necessity. When your grandfather started the business, life became complicated for all of us, and certain choices were made without options. I hope that one day you can understand that I didn't have a choice. Above all, I hope you can forgive me. Wherever I am, know that I'm always cheering for you. Never let anyone take away your dreams. With all my love, your father." Emily felt her eyes fill with tears as each word reopened wounds she thought she had healed. A storm of emotions welled up inside her, a mixture of anger, sadness, and a strange longing for the man who had been absent her whole life. She looked up at Donna, who watched her with guilt written all over her face. "Why did you hide this from me?" Emily's voice was barely a whisper. I could have understood things differently." Donna took a deep breath, folding her arms defensively. "I thought I was protecting you, Emily. I wanted you to move forward without holding on to the past." Emily felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. She knew arguing wouldn't change anything now, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she had been robbed of an important part of her own story. "What else have you kept from me?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and hurt. "Nothing that would change what you already know," Donna replied, visibly uncomfortable. "I kept it from you to spare you the pain. I thought that if you found happiness with Tyler, you'd have the stability I never did." Emily remained silent, struggling to process her frustration and sadness. At that moment, she felt more lost than ever. The doubts she had about the wedding seemed to intensify, and the knowledge that her own family had concealed truths from her only fueled her uncertainty. Just then, Tyler re-entered the room, sensing the heavy atmosphere immediately. "Is everything okay?" he asked, looking between Emily and her mother with a concerned expression. Emily quickly wiped away her tears, forcing a smile. It's fine. Just last-minute emotions. He nodded, but his eyes showed that he wasn't entirely convinced. Respecting her privacy, he offered his hand. Shall we go, Emily? I think we've had enough for one night. She took his hand gratefully, following him out of the house. As they walked to his car, Tyler stayed quiet, giving her space to process. But halfway through the drive, he broke the silence. You know you don't have to hide anything from me, right? Emily sighed, watching the city lights blur through the window. I just found out something about my father tonight. Something that makes me question everything I thought I knew. I guess I'm just trying to process it. Tyler didn't respond immediately. Instead, he drove in silence for a few more minutes until they pulled up in front of her apartment. Turning to her, he spoke gently. If you ever need to talk about it, you know where to find me. You don't have to face this alone. She looked at him, surprised by his kindness, and felt a flicker of gratitude. Thank you, Tyler. As strange as it sounds, I don't think I've ever had someone support me like this. He smiled, a small, honest smile. Remember our agreement? Mutual support. She returned his smile, and for a brief moment, felt that maybe, just maybe, this agreement meant more than either of them had intended. The wedding day arrived like a storm, leaving Emily feeling as though she were in a dream. That morning, she woke with a mix of dread and resignation. Her wedding dress hung by the window, the sunlight casting a soft glow over its delicate lace and intricate beadwork. Alongside it were the accessories Donna had meticulously chosen: a long veil, a sparkling tiara, and pearl earrings. Every detail was perfect, at least on the outside. Donna entered the room, her eyes misty as she took in Emily's appearance. You look beautiful, honey, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion as she fixed a stray lock of Emily's hair. Every mother dreams of this moment. Emily nodded but felt the words lacked true meaning. She knew the wedding was as much her mother's achievement as it was her own, if not more. This day represented Donna's dream of security and social acceptance as much as Emily's future. Thanks, Mom, Emily murmured, doing her best to keep her voice steady. Oh, sweetheart, it's normal to feel nervous, Donna said, her tone more cheerful as she adjusted Emily's veil. But believe me, someday you'll understand this was all for the best. Emily forced a smile, but it felt hollow, like a fragile promise she was no longer sure she could keep. She longed for a life that was truly hers, and the ceremony that awaited her felt more like a step into someone else's story. When Emily was finally dressed and ready, she stood alone in front of the mirror. She saw a flawless bride, dressed in white, but there was a sadness in her eyes that no amount of makeup or lace could hide. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Tyler, asking to speak with her. Dressed in an elegant black tuxedo, he looked calm, but his eyes showed a hint of worry. I know this isn't exactly the best time, but, he hesitated, his expression uncertain. I have to ask, are you truly okay with this? Emily swallowed hard, surprised by his directness. It's too late to back out, Tyler, she replied softly, trying to suppress the surge of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. We've come too far. He nodded, studying her face with unexpected tenderness. I know we made an agreement, Emily. But for a moment, if you wanted to walk away, I'd help you. I wouldn't let anyone come after you. He offered a slight smile, though his voice was serious. That's what I'd call real support. Emily looked at him, torn between the impulse to accept his offer and the reality of everything they'd promised their families. She knew escaping now would be impossible. The weight of her responsibilities, the sacrifices both of them had made, were too heavy to simply walk away from. Thank you, Tyler, she whispered, her voice steadying. But this isn't just about me. It's about my mother, about your family, about... She let the words trail off, unable to articulate the depth of her own internal prison. He sighed, nodding as if he understood perfectly. Then let's face it together. Tyler held out his hand, and after a moment, Emily took it, feeling a rush of determination she hadn't expected. The ceremony was held outdoors in the sprawling garden of the Montgomery estate, decorated with white flowers and twinkling lights draped from the trees. Emily walked down the aisle with a pounding heart, acutely aware of the dozens of eyes on her, the soft music filling the air, and Tyler waiting for her at the altar. For just a moment, the noise faded, and all she could hear was her own breathing. When she finally reached Tyler, he gave her a small, comforting smile. Throughout the ceremony, he held her hand with a steady grip, projecting a calm that soothed her. "With this ring, I promise," Tyler began, reciting his vows, and Emily felt a brief pang of something real in his words. When it was her turn to speak, Emily's mind raced. She knew these words were just a public act, a promise neither truly intended to keep. But in that moment, standing beside Tyler, the commitment felt oddly genuine. The priest's voice rang out over the crowd, declaring them husband and wife. "You may kiss the bride." Tyler leaned in, placing a soft, careful kiss on her lips. To the guests, it was a kiss shared by a loving couple. But for Emily and Tyler, it was the final seal of a contract, a silent acknowledgement of their shared understanding. The reception was grand and luxurious, with speeches, toasts, and dancing. Emily smiled through countless congratulations and polite conversations, while Tyler played the role of the perfect husband, introducing her to friends and business associates. Beneath the surface, she felt drained by the endless performance. Eventually, Tyler led her to a private room where they could rest briefly, away from the curious eyes of their guests. "Well done, Mrs. Montgomery," he said with a relieved smile. "I think we managed to fool everyone." Emily let out a tired laugh, sinking into an armchair and kicking off her shoes. "Finally, it's over, isn't it?" she asked, hoping that at least the worst was behind them. But Tyler hesitated, a serious look crossing his face. "Emily, there's something I need to tell you," he began cautiously. "My father. He has plans to expand the business into New York, and he expects me to go there to lead the new division. Naturally, he expects you to come with me." Emily stared at him, trying to absorb what this meant. She had never imagined their arrangement would involve a move that could derail everything she wanted. "So, we have to move to New York?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tyler nodded, his expression regretful. "Yes. I know it wasn't part of what we planned, but my father wants me to step into the role he's set up, and he believes having you with me will strengthen the business's reputation there." A knot of anxiety formed in Emily's stomach. All she wanted was to finish her studies, to pursue her dream of working in psychology. New York felt like an abrupt end to the life she was trying to build. "I can't give up on my dreams, Tyler," she murmured, her voice choked with emotion. He knelt down beside her, taking her hands in his. "I promise I won't let this destroy everything you want, Emily. We'll find a way to make it work for you in New York. This agreement is still ours, and I'll do everything I can to help you have your life there, even if it means stepping away from the business." Emily took a deep breath, sensing a sincerity in him that surprised her. Perhaps this move could mark the start of something different, a new path that allowed them to stay true to themselves. "All right then," she said finally, gripping his hand firmly. "We'll go to New York. But our rules stay the same." He nodded, a small, determined smile on his face. "Agreed." In that moment, they knew the road ahead would be filled with uncertainties, but at least they'd be facing it together. The first few months in New York introduced a new kind of challenge for Emily and Tyler. The city was vibrant yet overwhelming, with an energy that felt as if it could consume them whole. Tyler quickly became entangled in endless business meetings, the weight of his father's expectations growing with every passing day. Richard Montgomery's plans for the company expansion were relentless, and Tyler soon found himself on a grueling schedule, barely managing time for himself, let alone anything else. Meanwhile, Emily threw herself into her own life, enrolling in a specialization program for psychology that allowed her a glimmer of satisfaction amidst the chaos. The apartment they shared in the Upper East Side was spacious enough for them to maintain their boundaries, providing a kind of sanctuary from the demands of the world outside. To everyone around them, the business partners, friends, and family back in Chicago, they seemed like the perfect, successful couple. But in reality, they continued to live parallel lives, respecting the limits they had agreed on from the beginning. One night, after a marathon of back-to-back meetings, Tyler came home looking drained. Emily was reading on the couch, and she looked up as he slumped down, loosening his tie and closing his eyes for a moment. She could see the exhaustion etched on his face, something she understood all too well. Setting her book aside, she moved closer to him. "Are you all right?" she asked gently, her voice filled with genuine concern. Tyler let out a long sigh, covering his face with his hands before looking at her, his expression both weary and conflicted. "I think I underestimated what all of this would be," he admitted quietly. "My father's demands, the constant pressure. It feels like I'm losing myself in all of it." Emily listened, sensing the vulnerability in his words. She knew what it was like to feel trapped under the weight of other people's plans and expectations, but it was different seeing it in him. "Maybe you need to step back, Tyler," she said softly. "You don't have to keep trying to impress your father. You're only going to end up burning yourself out." He opened his eyes, giving her a look that was equal parts surprised and grateful. "It's funny. I don't think anyone's ever told me that before. Everyone expects me to do exactly the opposite." Emily nodded, knowing what he meant. Both of them were held captive by roles they hadn't chosen, and though they had agreed to this arrangement, it was becoming clearer that their struggles weren't as separate as they once believed. That night, while Tyler rested on the couch, Emily felt a strange sense of closeness to him. It was unlike anything she'd expected to feel for him. In their agreement, they'd promised to support each other, but what was growing between them now went beyond that. It was a connection that neither had anticipated, one built on mutual understanding rather than obligation. Over the next few weeks, that connection continued to grow. Tyler took an active interest in Emily's studies, supporting her dreams in a way she hadn't experienced before. He encouraged her to pursue her goals, celebrating her small victories with genuine enthusiasm. Slowly but surely, their relationship evolved into something unexpected, something neither could ignore. But their fragile peace was disrupted when Richard Montgomery arrived in New York for a business review. Richard was not a man who tolerated distractions, and he quickly noticed that his son's dedication had shifted. It didn't take him long to voice his concerns. "Tyler, you've been distracted lately," Richard said in a sharp, disappointed tone after a tense meeting. "You need to focus on the company and eliminate these unnecessary diversions." Tyler knew all too well that his father was referring to Emily. To Richard, she was nothing more than a distraction, and while Tyler kept his composure, the weight of his father's expectations grew heavier. That evening, Tyler returned home much later than usual. Emily had been waiting for him to join her for dinner, and she looked up as he entered, noticing the strain in his eyes as he walked to the window, staring out into the city, lost in thought. "What happened?" she asked softly, moving toward him. Tyler sighed, his gaze fixed on the lights twinkling across the city. "It was my father. He said I need to focus completely on the business and let go of unnecessary distractions. He's made it clear he expects my full dedication, and I think we both know who he's talking about." Emily felt a rush of anger on his behalf and an unexpected need to defend him. She reached out, placing her hand on his arm. "Tyler, you've already given so much of yourself to him. Maybe it's time to figure out what you want. You deserve more than just being an extension of his dreams." He turned to look at her, his eyes filled with uncertainty, as though he were seeing his life from a new perspective. "And what do I want?" he murmured, almost to himself, his voice thick with confusion. "Sometimes I don't even know anymore." Emily's grip tightened slightly, and she met his gaze. "Maybe it's time to find out. You deserve a life of your own, Tyler." He held her gaze, and in that moment, something shifted between them. Without thinking, Tyler leaned down, cupping her face as he kissed her, an unexpected, intense kiss that left them both breathless. Emily returned the kiss, and for an instant, the world outside faded away. Their obligations, the agreement, all the pressures, they all melted, leaving only them in the quiet of their apartment. But the moment passed all too quickly. When they finally broke apart, both looked at each other in shock, the reality settling in. Emily took a step back, trying to catch her breath and her thoughts. "Tyler," she whispered, her voice shaky. This wasn't part of the agreement." He looked away, clearly conflicted but unapologetic. "I know. But I don't regret it," he said firmly. "Maybe this whole arrangement started as a plan, but now it's something I can't ignore." Emily's heart pounded at his words. Part of her wanted to embrace this new feeling, but another part feared it. Their agreement had been a carefully constructed wall, and admitting to feelings beyond that would make everything more complicated. "We agreed to keep this as an arrangement, Tyler," she said, though her voice betrayed her own doubts. He nodded slowly, understanding her fear. "I know. And if that's what you want, we can keep things as they were. I'll respect whatever you decide, Emily. But I need you to know," he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "You're the only person who truly understands me. And I don't want to lose that." Emily's eyes filled with tears. Despite everything, she felt something undeniable growing between them. She knew that embracing it could change everything, for better or worse. After a long pause, she finally took a deep breath and whispered, "Then maybe we can rewrite our agreement." The air felt charged with electricity as Emily and Tyler stood in the quiet of their living room, facing the weight of the unspoken words between them. To rewrite the agreement meant opening up to something real, something neither of them had planned for but that both felt deep down. In that silent, intense moment, they both understood that moving forward meant risking more than they had ever intended. "If we're going to do this, Tyler, we need to be honest. No more pretending. No more keeping things hidden from each other," Emily said, her voice steady despite the emotions roiling within her. Tyler nodded, his expression determined. "Agreed. But that means we need to stand up for what we want, even if it means going against our families." Emily knew how much that would cost both of them. The Montgomerys expected Tyler to stay under his father's thumb, while her mother, Donna, had already built her own dreams around this union. But for the first time, Emily didn't feel fear. She felt a strange sense of freedom knowing Tyler would be by her side. Over the next few days, they maintained a careful distance from their families, but they knew it wouldn't last. The turning point came when Richard Montgomery summoned both Tyler and Emily to his office, the request sounding more like a command than an invitation. The moment they walked in, they knew he already sensed the shift between them. Richard observed them with his usual calculating gaze, his expression unreadable as he gestured for them to sit. "I'll be direct with both of you," Richard began, leaning forward. "I know something has changed between you. I know about every detail that happens within this family, within my business. Tyler, I expected more from you. I expected you, at the very least, to stick to our plans." Tyler held his father's gaze, a faint flicker of resentment in his eyes. "Dad, I've spent my entire life sticking to your plans. I've done everything you asked. Married, kept up the family image, sacrificed my own choices. But now, I want to live my own life." Richard let out a short, cold laugh, as though Tyler's words were a naive joke. "And you think that's possible? What will our family be without the legacy I've built? Are you ready to throw everything away for some whim?" Emily felt Richard's sharp gaze land on her, and she realized he thought of her as the whim Tyler was referring to. She straightened, meeting Richard's gaze with quiet defiance. "Mr. Montgomery, I never wanted to harm the business or Tyler's future. But we deserve the chance to live our lives the way we choose. After years of living for everyone else, maybe we've earned that." Richard's eyes narrowed slightly, and for a brief moment, Emily thought she saw a flash of understanding in his eyes. But it was quickly replaced with his usual hardness. Tyler broke the silence that followed. "Dad, I want to leave the company," Tyler said, his voice firm. "I need time to find out who I really am, and I'm willing to take that chance. You always talk about legacy, but maybe my legacy is different from what you've envisioned." Richard's expression turned cold, and he stood, his voice cutting like a blade. "If you leave the company, Tyler, you lose everything. The position, the inheritance, every advantage I've provided for you. Think very carefully about this choice." Tyler didn't flinch, though Emily could see the pain in his eyes. "I understand. And I'm prepared for the consequences." Richard dismissed them with a stern wave of his hand, refusing to hear another word. As they walked out, Tyler and Emily were silent, both knowing there was no turning back now. When they reached the quiet of their apartment, Tyler closed the door and let out a deep breath, the weight of his decision settling on him. "That was intense," he muttered, looking at Emily with a mixture of relief and nervousness. "But now we're free." Emily smiled, feeling the same strange mix of fear and exhilaration. For the first time, they were free to create their own future, no longer bound by anyone else's expectations. The road ahead felt unpredictable, but it was entirely theirs. In the months that followed, Tyler began to explore new possibilities. With Emily's encouragement, he pursued his long-held dream of starting a foundation for young entrepreneurs. Though the journey was far from easy, Tyler grew stronger with every step, finding pride in a life he was building on his own terms. Emily was by his side, his biggest supporter and closest confidant. Emily, too, flourished. She finished her specialization and started working at a psychology clinic, finally fulfilling the dream she had held onto for so long. And Tyler was there for every success, celebrating her victories with genuine joy. Their marriage, once a practical arrangement, blossomed into a real partnership, a love neither of them had expected. Slowly, their relationship grew deeper. Tyler became Emily's true friend, and eventually her lover, their bond no longer defined by obligation but by a shared life they were building together. In the end, the original pact they had made dissolved, replaced by a new promise, one based not on duty, but on choice. Tyler and Emily had found not just freedom in each other, but the chance to live a life that truly belonged to them, side by side.